This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland.
You're listening to the 8th programme of Giving the Greatest Good, and in this programme we investigate the remarkable story of Reverend James Alcock of Ring in County Waterford.
Alcock and Strangeman really saved Ring.
By inviting the Society of Friends, he ensured the survival of the Ring population really through the famine.
Reverend Alcock, he appeared to be a very good manager of men and people.
He never enforced his religion on anyone, didn't make any difference to him.
If you go to Ring now, it's a vibrant community, but all to do with Alcock and the collaboration with Strangeman.
The community would have suffered much higher fatalities or mortality rates than it did.
James Alcock, he was always doing good.
I think the intervention of Alcock and the Society of Friends really had a major impact on the survival of the community and the fishing industry.
He wasn't a man for glory, he kept everything level-headed.
Reverend Alcock was a human being first. He saw the similarity between himself and the Ring fishermen rather than the differences.
Humanitarian that cared more about people to live than they did about religion.
Only for him, the whole peninsula and headland of Ring would be totally wiped out.
I'm Paul Wright and welcome to the 8th programme of Giving the Greatest Good. In our last programme we threw light on how a wealthy Quaker couple, James and Mary Ellis, helped to stave off destitution for large numbers of people in Connemara during the mid-19th century when famine decimated Ireland. Now another individual who also did remarkable work to alleviate suffering in his community during the famine was a Church of Ireland vicar, Reverend James Alcock of Ring Parish, County Waterford. And before we hear just how Reverend Alcock helped to save the fishing community of Ring, first we briefly examine just how chronic things became for the fishermen of Ring when the Great Famine struck Ireland in the mid-1840s. County Waterford local historian John Young.
The fishermen, they were so destitute. They even sold the hooks, the lines, their boats, their oars. They actually used the linings of the boat as fuel. Basically, they were living on nothing, and death was staring them in the face.
And Ring local historian Nicholas O'Griefa shares his views.
Well, I suppose in all reports that we get about the famine, when the Quakers came here giving the money, I think it just shows a clear picture that fishing was at a dead end. They had nothing to fish with.
So really they were becoming destitute, and people have said, well, why didn't they get seaweed, shellfish?
Willie Farrar, historian and also curator of Waterford County Museum.
We actually have accounts in Dungarvan where everything was picked clean from the rocks, and people were eating the seaweed raw straight from the rocks. So really, there was nothing to eat unless you had the gear and the proper boats to go out and fish. You had to apply to enter the workhouse. That was your last resort.
And it was at this critical juncture when the Ring fishing community faced annihilation that Reverend James Alcock enters our story. And before throwing light on just how he helped to save Ring, first here's historian Nicholas O'Griefa to explain Alcock's roots.
Reverend James Alcock was born in Waterford City around 1805. He received, as far as is known, all his education in Trinity College, Dublin. And he lectured then in St. Olave's in Waterford for a few years. And when the Church of Ireland built their church here, he came here as the vicar.
However, mystery still exists as to why exactly Alcock was appointed vicar to Ring.
It's very hard to understand it, because at that stage, as far as I can see, and I'm searching a lot for it, there was only 2 Church of Ireland families in this parish at that time. There was Haggerty, the landlord in Barton, over there in Barton, and there was Dr. Graves in Helvig Head. So he was hardly sent here for 2 families. But I think the British had a policy at the time. See, we had the Coast Guards here, which would amount to 6 or 7 families. And all along the coastline here in Bunmahan, go on from Ring here to Armore, they built a church. St. Nicholas's Church, they built it here in Ring.
And whatever the reason for Alcock ending up in Ring, by 1846 he saw that his Catholic neighbours were in dire straits. County Waterford historian Joan Johnson.
Reverend Alcock was a Church of Ireland minister there, serving the Ring and its district, and he was absolutely desperate. He could see the boats had been pawned, no fishing out on the sea because the potato had failed. There was no barter, you see. They would have grown the potato and then brought it to market, well, fed themselves, and that was the way that they got more food in. And so the potato was gone, and they had no energy to get out on their boats, and then they actually had to pawn their boats, or some of them actually, he describes how they were just cut and used as firewood. And so he wrote to Joshua William Strangeman in a desperate effort. So Waterford Quakers responded.
Joshua Strangeman was appointed to organise the aid along with the Reverend Alcock. Weekly supplies of meal were given to the fishermen, and they were also given loans ranging from, I think it's about 10 shillings to £3. And this was to repair their boats and to purchase gear. And by 1847, I think the crew of about 49 boats were able to support their families, which was a great achievement. By 1848, it was reported that there was no destitution in Ring, and that the fishermen were provided by a sufficient supply of fishing gear for their immediate wants, and therefore are constantly employed whenever fishing permits. This is a quotation from one of the letters.
When Strangeman came here, you see, on the advice of Alcock to make up a plan, you see, to what release they would give the fishermen. The first one they came in there was about 10 different families. You got 10 shillings, we'll say, for a crew of 2, and if you had a crew of 4, you got £3. And the way they paid that back was the first loan they got was £20, and you paid 6pence in the pound to pay it back. So they were so successful with the first loan that they got another one, £30 the second time. And it was the same rate, of course, you see. But one thing I'd have to say about it, all the money that was on loan to the fishermen of Ballinagall, they all paid it back in time.
Historian Nicholas O'Griefa. Here's historian John Young to take up the story.
But as a result of the grants that were issued by the Quakers and in conjunction with Reverend Alcock, 49 vessels put to sea. Now, you would have a type of vessel which is similar to, it's like a Ballinagall hooker or a Galway hooker. Now, these were actually built by Scottish tradesmen to show the locals how to repair their boats, and they actually extended the boats and made bigger ones, and they even traded with Cork and Waterford. Now, they would actually, you must think about it, they went to Cork with fish all the ways. They used stones on the floor of the boat as ballast. And I was looking at my records there. When they got going, within 6 months there, one boat caught 4,000 mackerel in one day. One boat. Now, that was the equivalent in monetary terms, it was £10. Which was a hell of a lot of money. Another boat went out and caught £15 worth of fish. That will tell you that the people of the Ring Peninsula, once they got the help at all, they got up and it rose out of the ashes like the phoenix within a short period of time. And it is, looking back on it now, they were wonderful, wonderful people.
However, it's important to stress that Reverend Alcock didn't act alone in assisting the Ring community from 1846 onwards. Nicholas O'Griefa.
Alcock, I know he was the man that got the Society of Friends involved in the fishing industry in Ballinaghowl. But there was a few more people, I suppose, you'd have to think of as well at the time. You'd have to think of Joshua Strangeman as well, a Waterford Quaker. Now, he got him involved in it. And also here, at the same time, there was a Dr. Graves, born, I'd say, about 1812, in Brook, in Helvig Lodge over here.
Would have been the Church of Ireland.
He was the Church of Ireland, and of course himself and Alcock would be the best of friends. But it's kind of forgotten. I mean, Dr. Graves gave a pile of reports on medical grounds, which were always ignored by the local landlord, actually, the stewards of the diocese. And anything that Graves seemed to put forward to improve the living conditions of Ballinaghowl, like we'll say closing in the river, putting up the whitewash, and several other things regards vermin and all that to do away with it. He always seemed to be at loggerheads with Stewart, and that went on even until the 1880s. Maybe 1890s. You see, so they are the three that I would attribute to do all the work for the people of Ballinaghowl in that period.
Strangman, Graves, and Alcock as well.
Alcock, yes, and Alcock. And of course the Quakers themselves that give the money. If they didn't give the money, any of those people probably we're talking about today, we wouldn't know anything about them.
Yet Alcock all was not gone, to wail of death and famine song, to countless victims unable to cope. They were the few warriors of hope.
And it's also worth pointing out that all loans given by Waterford Quakers to the fishing community of Ring were not handouts, but rather a hand up. Joan Johnson.
They would give the loans, and when the loans were paid back, that money would be recycled back in again so that more people could get loans, so it wasn't free gratis money just going down to A or B or C, but they would expect a return, and that would be in respecting the person who they were giving it to, and then expect that person to be able to repay for a boat, for example. I mean, there were money given for grants for boats, for buying boats down the west coast of Ireland. I mean, I think they had worked out that a boat would cost between £6 and £10 each. And once that boat was up and running and the returns were coming in, and there's records of those boats being paid for as well. So it was one of the enduring principles that money was not given free gratis unless it was absolutely necessary.
They were the few, this is their song, who gave their all to right or wrong, that future generations might know about those who cared for Erin's woe.
I would say at this stage there that the Ring fishermen were the most honest, dependable men and women. I know that you must take into account fishermen and women as well, because they paid their bills back to a T. Every one of them paid their bills back before the money was due. They had a certain time to pay back. Maybe someone got £3, maybe someone got £15. That would be the average, but they actually became self-sufficient, and you could still see it now. When I was a young lad there in the 50s and 60s, there you go out to Ballinaghowl, and they had a lovely, lovely way about them, nice and cool, steady about the way they went, but very, very efficient. And they knew the seasons, they knew how to do the thing properly, and they done it in an eco way as well.
Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, those brave few souls who answered needs, to countless victims unable to cope. They were the few warriors of hope.
So just how dramatic was the turnaround in the fortunes of the Ring fishermen? due to the timely intervention of Alcock Strangman and the Waterford Quakers in that critical year of 1846.
So the boats were put on, the nets went out, and in the book there's returns of mackerel steaming out there and being caught, and then that gave them just that small step up to allow them to get going again. And I do have a letter from Alcock to Strangman, and after 6 months, this is what he says. We have had, thank God, no destitution up to the present. All are beginning once more to look cheerful, robust and comfortable. They are provided with a sufficient supply of fishing gear for our immediate wants, and therefore constantly employed whenever the weather permits. I might almost add that no weather prevents them from putting to sea in search of fish, so great is their anxiety and ambition to be distinguished for industry, hardihood and preservation. We have been remarked that there has been many more persons engaged in taking haddock, cod, ling on the coast during the late inclement season than in any former year. A very visible improvement is, I say now, observable among the fishermen. Their houses have been all newly thatched, and the whitening walls and neatly sanded floors give an appearance of cleanliness and comfort to those humble dwellings to which the inmates were heretofore strangers. So that was within 6 months. There was a complete turnaround.
Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, the brave few answered others' needs. The countless victims unable to cope, they were the few warriors of hope.
The Cork Examiner did a review of Alcock's report on the Ring district.
Historian Willie Frahar of Waterford County Museum.
And we can just quote some pieces from that. It was at a period when distress, the most appalling, swept the poor population of Ring. That inquiry was directed by the agent of the body, the Society of Friends, to the Reverend Mr. Alcock. As to the best mode of assisting the fishermen, loans from £1 to £3 were given to the fishermen with an abatement for their punctual repayment. So they had to repay these loans. Now, they weren't free offers. They were also given a small quantity of meal and clothing. The Examiner article pointed out on the success of the experiment. The crew of one boat obtained a loan of £3, with which they purchased a sweep net. Their first catch included 4,000 mackerel worth £10, which is a substantial amount. Another man bought herring nets, and after 2 days he had caught £15 worth of fish. Enough, it was stated, to enable him to buy the fee simple of his house. We find that in one hamlet there were last year 100 families in distress, while there are not now more than 7. It was remarked that the loans had enabled 230 heads of families to support themselves. Alcock called for the construction of a pier, and this is a quote from Alcock. Often have I stood watching them after a night of excessive labour and hardship, pushing up their boats against a steep bank, while their backs were literally streaming with blood from the exertions. The report also noted that the fishermen had constructed a rude breakwater of loose stones piled together, and the article concluded by stating that the loans had recently been revived on a larger scale. So obviously they were pleased with the reaction and what was actually done with the loans, that they have given further increased loans to the local people.
In other words, the net result was that over a relatively short period of time, the fishing community of Ring became self-supporting. However, as our prior speaker Willie Frahar just touched on, not content with this achievement, Reverend James Alcock also campaigned to improve the Ring fisheries with the construction of a new pier at Ballinagowel. Historian Joan Johnson.
The other thing is that they campaigned for a pier. in Ballinagowl. We went down and we were shown the pier, and Alcock and Strangman, I have letters there, were campaigning to try and get this pier, because up till then the fishermen were just pulling up onto the sandy beach or the shale down there.
But he also sent letters to the government.
Ring local historian Seamus O'Murray.
Some of those letters are in the National Archives, because at that time there was a campaign between 1824 and 1848. There was a concerted campaign to get a pier in Ballinagowl, and the famous Scottish engineer Alexander Nemo, who built Dunleary and Dunmore East actually, came to Ring at Stuart's invitation and drew up a very concise and plan of the pier, a new pier in Ballinagowl, in the 1820s, in 1890, when he was in Dunmore East. He was in Dunmore East from the 1818 to 1824 about, and at that time he came to Ballinagowl at Stuart's invitation.
And the pier, they lobbied for the pier. These things had to be worked out, and I think fundamentally Alcock and Strangman wrote the letters and had influence and went to meet the important people that were going to make the decisions. And so Alcock was absolutely thrilled when Ballinagowl pier was made, and it meant that there was safe harbour for all the boats.
Yeah, it was built in 1848, and it was finished in 1849 from local stone mostly. The engineer that was on it at that time was from Kilrush, and O'Donnell was his name. The family actually are still in Dungarvan. There was local work on it. It's actually built of blocks of stone, but the inside of the pier is actually filled with the rubble of the old pier that was there, or the makeshift pier that was there before. And it has very few repairs in the intervening years. The sailing boats that were there into the 20th century used that pier, and when the fishing here was very strong at that time, and there were up to 30 hookers when they got the new pier. In the late 19th century, Ballinagowl was the chief fishing port on the south coast of Ireland.
And aside from his campaign to get Ballinagowl pier built, Alcock and the Waterford Quakers also put a great deal of energy into getting new nets supplied to the fishermen of Ring. They also obtained for them new all-weather clothing so that they could fish year-round, as well as helping to instruct them on net mending and various new fishing techniques, which would greatly improve their work effectivity. James Alcock himself also campaigned for the relaxation of law, which restricted the use of trammel nets, the kind used by Ring fishermen and which greatly curtailed them in their work. Joan Johnson.
And there were restrictions also on the size of the nets, the trammel nets. Now, I'm no expert on fisheries, but I gather that there was a sort of a cap on the type of net that was used, and also as to what time of day that they could go out and actually fish. I know Alcock and Strangman worked at that and got this bylaw changed where they could go out at any time. Before they could only go out, I think, when the sun was down or something ghastly like that, and that bylaw was put in place, and Strangman certainly refers to that, and that meant that the fishermen could be not restricted and could go out, and therefore the fisheries really took off there, and therefore the community was sustained as it is a vibrant community today.
This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. Songs by Cliff Wedgbury. And to find out more about the remarkable work of Reverend James Alcock, in conjunction with Joshua Strangeman and the Waterford Quakers, in helping to save the fishing community of Ring in County Waterford. Then make sure to catch our next number 9 programme in this 9-part Giving the Greatest Good series. Until then, I'm going to leave the last word with various Alcock enthusiasts.
Maybe perhaps we wouldn't have the Gaeltacht that we have today without the efforts of Alcock.
I personally think that he never got the recognition that he should get.
He gave a lifetime of service to this parish.
His efforts meant that the community continued on in a fairly cohesive state.
He was such a wonderful man.
By inviting the Society of Friends, he ensured the survival of the Ring population really through the famine and enabled them to prosper after that period and develop the fishing industry.
He didn't just organise one shipment of bread or something up from Waterford to solve the problem on a short-term basis. He identified the problem and he identified the solution, and then he joined all the dots in between in order to ensure that the solution was arrived at, which he managed to do.
The country should acknowledge what Reverend Alcock done and Joshua Strangeman, and I think that something should be done just to commemorate their work and the Quaker society. Only for them there'd be nothing in Ring, there'd be totally decimation.
Exploits came to help and bless so many lives lived in distress. Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, those brave few souls answering needs. I sing of the Quaker Relief Committee, known to most as the CRC. They were the few, this is their song, who gave their all to right or wrong, that future generations might know about those who cared for Erin's woe. Yes, I sing of them who strove to save countless innocents from the grave. Soup kitchens, clothing, agri-relief, they gave so much to ease the grief. They were the few, this is their song, who gave their all to right or wrong, that future generations might know about those who cared for Erin's woe. I see them now, brave warriors of light, against famine's horror, fighting the fight. Joseph Yule's endless giving to help those barely living. Mount Mellick's son, Joseph Beale, working to give subsidized meal to many neighbours forsaken and worn, half dead, their lifeblood quickly gone. Emboldened by Erin's grievous mine, the Ellises from Bradford came on the scene. Working hard from 49, they gave schools jobs and something fine. Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, those brave few souls who answered needs. To countless victims unable to cope, they were the few warriors of hope. Jacob Harvey's love for man shone bright. He too paid the ultimate price, helping Irish in New York. He died from overwork, but others survived. Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, the brave few who answered others' needs. The countless victims unable to cope, they were the warriors of hope. Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, the brave few answered others' needs. The countless victims unable to cope, they were the few warriors of hope.